how do you feel about being the first guest of season 2?
Works for me.
Are you excited?
Season 2 is always better than season 1, isn't it?
We could probably put that to the test with all the stuff we've watched on Netflix over the last year. Oftentimes the second series is better. Sometimes
when you get
peak
to
too soon.
Season 6, isn't it? That's when it starts getting weak.
Yeah. I'll bow out before I get to season 6. So we're right in the prime then, really, of what this podcast is going to have to offer, aren't we?
Sure.
I haven't thought about what we're going to talk about. I thought we could just have a chat.
Okay.
And see what happens.
Do you not have like a list of questions that you work through?
Well, yes and no. I find when I've had those prepared in the past, I end up not getting around to asking any of them, because you ask one thing and then before you know it, the conversation just goes somewhere that you didn't expect it to, and then you don't have a list of topics. Although what I thought I would open with is, I mean, this podcast is obviously called The Unlikely Accountant, which is named after me. I'm the unlikely accountant. But would you say you're an unlikely accountant?
I'm less unlikely than you are. But I didn't think I'd end up being an accountant, which I suppose I haven't.
Well, no, because you are an accountant, aren't you?
No, but I'm an accountant, but I'm not called an accountant at work. I'm a
No, you're not. But you. Well, what did you think? What did you think you were going to do? What did you want to do when you were younger?
I didn't know what I wanted to do, which is why I did accountancy.
Yeah, I think that's probably what happens to most people, isn't it?
Because I was, in my mind, it was, I had a good time at university, and one of the reasons I picked Deloitte was that you could get a job and then have a gap year and go traveling, and then come back to something. And also, it was like almost an extension of university, because you could do your study whilst working a bit, whilst deciding what you really wanted to do once you qualified.
That's interesting. So you took a job that meant that you could not work for another year.
Basically, yeah. It was one of the thoughts around it at the time. But also, you knew. Bearing in mind, this is going back to 1999 when I was applying, the milk round type jobs of going to work for a big corporate was still knocking around in the system, and they were still popular. I imagine they're less so now. And also the big thing that was growing at the time was banking. So everyone wanted to go down to London to work for an investment bank or a hedge fund or something in between. And so actually accountancy then was pretty, it was quite an unfashionable area to go into. Whereas if you go fast forward 10 years, when you've had a global depression, credit crunch, all of a sudden it became quite popular because it was a sort of flight to quality, flight to safety type thing. And you were getting this badge that couldn't be taken away from you and was sort of an anchor to your career. So it was quite different when I did it. It wasn't the norm, or it was less. It was just a less popular choice, which is why they were doing things like
bribing people to work there.
have a gap year and then come back and work a year later.
That's so what's going to appeal to students? How can we attract students? Yeah, give them a job, but tell them that they don't actually have to work for another year. That seems to be a good way to get the numbers.
I mean, it was perfect, really, because you could then just pack your bag, pack your rucksack, and go off, knowing full well that in September the following year you were starting up somewhere. So that was one of the decisions in my mind. The other was obviously that it as I said, it sort of pushed out the decision-making process, because in my mind, I thought I'll probably end up in London working for a bank or doing something down there. But I'll get this out of the way first.
Where did you go on your gap year?
The usual backpacker route at the time.
Like so Central and South America?
No, that was after. That was the next thing. I did sort of Thailand, down through there, then Australia, New Zealand, across America. It was my route.
But it was nice and character building.
Yeah, it was good. It was better to go then. I mean, bearing in mind, again, gap years were becoming more popular, certainly before you went to university. And actually going after university was much better. You do a lot more things when you're 21 than when you're 18 in the globe.
Yeah.
It's still quite, and you're probably a little bit more streetwise when you're 21.
A little bit more.
Just enough, just that little bit more.
Yeah. Streetwise enough to know that you needed to have sorted a job before you went off, and then you had the security of. Yeah.
But it was quite hard when you got back, because all of a sudden, having not really used my brain for a year, I was having to, you sat in your lecture or whatever, doing your learning T accounts and all that sort of stuff, and going back to scratch. So that, and having done a history degree rather than anything finance related, it was quite a big leap for me to get my maths head back on. So it was quite hard at the beginning. I felt quite a bit behind some of the others that were in there, and then slowly get into the rhythm of it again.
Well, it is. I mean, it is hard. They are. I thought they were hard, the exams. I think I struggled more than most.
Probably the hardest thing you do, aren't they?
They are, because you're trying to study and work at the same time, and that's a bit of an alien concept, because obviously prior to that you're just at uni and you can just focus on your degree and going out. And then you get a job at Deloitte and you're trying to focus on still going out and work and exams, and it's a lot.
Yeah, and there's a lot of them, isn't there? There's a lot to learn, and there's no dodging it. You can't just try and cram it in the last week or so. You do.
No, you absolutely can't do that.
Bit of a shift in. So that, and I always intended then to, once I've qualified, was then, well, look, I'll look at what my choices are, because that was always the good thing about once you got that ACA qualification, you could then pick and choose. You could stick in practice, you could go into industry and do something sort of commercial based, or anything in between that.
So I mean, I obviously know what you did, but for the purposes of the listeners who don't know, what did you do? So after I qualified, I wanted to move back up north, and I got a job at MBNA, which is a credit card business, and I was doing some quite interesting stuff there. It was risk management type things, but I was getting involved in quite a few acquisitions. So we'd looked at buying Egg, which was a sort of credit card business around there at that time, and a couple of other things. But then that got bought by Bank of America, and all the sort of interesting, exciting stuff stopped. And that was when I went back to Deloitte. So I'd spoken to my old boss in Nottingham and said, look, a bit bored of where I am. What do you reckon my next step should be? And he said, well, they're crying out for people in corporate finance in Manchester, so send me your CV and I'll pass it on. So that's how I ended up back in at Deloitte. And it was that 4 years there that probably gave me the real bump up in my career, because it exposed me to things that I'd probably not really seen before in terms of talking to business owners, talking to senior people in businesses, ridiculously stupid hours. There's a slight downside of it. Yeah.
Pretty unsustainable over a long period of time unless you're really, really, really into it. But that was a really good 4 years slog, for want of a better word. And then I then sort of pretty much made my mind. So that was around 2006 to 2010. So I'd been through the credit crunch there, and we'd done okay out of it. I mean, I was the only person at my level in the team, so I sort of stayed really busy. But it was pretty clear that it was going to change in that business at that point, and it was going to get a bit more competitive around moving up. So I sort of sat there and went, well, this isn't what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I want to be an FD. I had sort of three sort of main measures really. One was variety. So I've got a very low concentration span. So I got bored very quickly. So if I didn't have variety, it was a nightmare for me. I'd just really, really struggle to.
And was the job routine at that? Because the businesses are different, aren't they? And the industries are different, but for all intents and purposes, you're looking at the same things, aren't you?
Once you've looked at one cash flow and you've worked through it, you've looked at them all really, and it becomes quite formulaic. And it becomes very process driven, like all sort of professional services. They have to break it down into something that can be repeated time and time again from a quality perspective. So yeah, it after 4 years or after sort of 3.5, it felt a bit samey for me. So I wanted something that gave me that variety, always did. And then I always wanted something that I felt like I was a decision maker or close to the decision maker. So I was pulling the lever myself rather than being told to pull that lever or this lever. That was always sort of high on my list of wants. And then the third bit was to sort of be fairly rewarded for what you're doing in whatever form that comes. And probably in no particular order across those three things. That was what I was always looking for. So I'd made the decision, right, I want to go out and I want to be one of the senior decision makers. And to be fair, it's quite difficult to move from being in practice and someone to trust you with a director role in whatever area you wanted to choose. So I ended up having to take a bit of a gamble, really. I went for something that was a startup, was just beginning to do something. It was all around branded hotels. So taking unbranded hotels or sub-brand, substandard branded hotels, and then rebranding them as a Hilton or a Holiday Inn or whatever it might be. And we had a fund in the background that we raised cash through to fund the property transaction side and the development side, and then you flipped it back into the fund, and that's how you made your money from it.
That's interesting. So who were you actually working for? So there was a fund that was buying up these hotels.
This is where it was a bit messy. So you were effectively the manager of the fund. So you were advising the fund, but you were also making a profit from that fund. So we were raising funds from individual investors, either through SIPs or ISAs or whatever it was, and then effectively giving them a ready-made property transaction that they would then earn an income off, and also a capital gain when you end up selling it 4, 5, 6 years down the line. And there's some grey areas in there because obviously you're making a profit yourself as a manager. So it's about getting the balance right between your profit and the investor's profit side of it. So it was very interesting. It was very property wasn't particularly for me because it's very lumpy transactions. There's not the smoothness through it. So you're desperately hunting around for a deal, and then you do a deal, and then work it through, and then everything's great for a couple of months, and then you're desperately hunting another deal.
See, this is really interesting because can you remember being back at Deloitte and knowing that you wanted to move on, and then how did you find this job? Was it through a recruiter, or did you approach them, or did they approach you?
Yeah, it was through it was through a recruiter, but it was someone I knew was the recruiter. So he'd rung up and said, "Look, this would be a good one actually. I can get you in on it." But it was a very different environment to Deloitte, where it was all very structured and safe, and you've got a career there. I went somewhere where it was a bit edgier. It was very much a startup environment, and it was there was a couple of other businesses that the guy had in there that were like hair salons, for example.
Oh.
They'd invested in hair salons, and they had a recruitment business themselves. So there was a lot which weren't performing particularly well. So there was loads of different hats you needed to have on. So there was a lot of variety in that perspective.
And did you not at any point think, I don't think I'm going to know what I'm doing here?
No, the only thing I thought was after 3 months is I've made the wrong choice here because he's got no cash.
Oh, okay.
And
it's quite a problem then.
Yeah, and this is going to be a lot harder work than I was led to believe. So,
right.
In the same way that I, you got lucky getting that role, also he probably got lucky getting me with having Deloitte on my CV and all the things that come with that, and all the connections in terms of who I knew in the banking world and legal side of stuff. So it was, I ended up being there for 18 months. I took it was loss making when I joined. When I left, it was profitable. But for me, I didn't see the longevity in it. It always felt like you were a bit feast to famine on the model side of it, and a very much hand to mouth. So, but if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have got the job at MPM.
Interesting.
Because I then had FD on my CV. I had quite a good story around what I'd done in terms of turning those businesses around. And if I wouldn't have got the job at MPM if I'd applied for it whilst I was still at Deloitte. So
that's interesting.
Having rolled those dice, and I did have quite a few people say to me, I don't know why you've left Deloitte, and seems like you're taking a big risk here. You've got 2 small kids at home. But for me, it was sort of, well, if I don't do it now, I might never do it. I've got.
So when this job, the first one outside of Deloitte, where 3 months in you realised there's no cash, did you not start to panic then and think, oh, I need to jump ship and find something else now? Or did you kind of think, no, I can turn this around, and secondly, I need to stay here for the sake of my CV?
Both of those, yeah.
Right.
You think you sit there and think, you go, no, I can see a pathway through this. I can sort this out if the cards fall our way. And also from a CV perspective, you think I've really got to make this work. And that was always one of the things with a Deloitte type structure where, you are going out, you're having lots of meetings and you are selling, Deloitte services. I was never particularly interested in doing that bit of it because I never felt it benefited me hugely. There'd be a partner in an office somewhere who'd get all the benefit from that. So I never tried particularly hard. But when it's your monthly salary on the line, and I was sometimes having to not pay myself to get through the month.
Really?
And hold mine back a week or so. Then all of a sudden you become a lot better at promoting what you're doing and selling what you need. So because you need to.
Yeah.
And that's where this entrepreneurialism bit kicks in. That's where people get this drive from. It's because it's not because they want to do it. It's because they have to do it to survive. In the first instance. So that was a great learning experience for me, properly thrown into the deep end, having to wrestle with things that I'd not come across, but then relying on your basic training and background to be able to pick your path through these things.
And in that time, because there must have been it's great that you were able to turn it around, and there's a nice, rags to riches type element of that story. But how much, there must have been a few things that either just luck helped you. Did luck help you out? Like, did some things just, needed to go in your favor and they did? And conversely, did anything during that time, really go against you? Or was it just basic, like hard graft, just being sensible, putting processes in place, blah, 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 that helped?
I always think there's a lot of luck involved in things. Right place, right time, that sort of stuff. And I think that there was enough luck in that first 12 months to make me realise that I didn't want to be there for much longer.
Okay.
However, I talk a lot about MPM as a business, which is pet food. So
which is where you are now after
where I am now, yeah. And I didn't know really at the time that pet market was going to grow like it has, that more and more people were going to be getting cats or dogs, that this whole humanization trend of pets would continue for as long as it has. It wasn't like I was sat there waiting for I really need to get into pet, and when something comes up, that's what I'm going to do. But it has happened, and I always feel that as a small business like we are, when I went in there, it was 11 million turnover and sort of break even at best, I would say. And we're now, this year, we've just done 100 million turnover and done our second management buyout private equity deal. But that we are a little ship getting tossed around in the ocean here, and you may move the rudder the right way as you're going down, down the wave, but ultimately you're not in 100% control of what you're driving. You're reliant on factors around you all the time. Now there's obviously judgment involved, and there's some strategic decisions you make along the way that benefit you. But it's the age-old saying, isn't it, that you can have a great management team, but if they're in a poor market, then they're not going to be able to turn it around. It's just impossible. You need the market going your way. I think I had a bit of that at the property place. But other than that, there is also a lot of rolling your sleeves up and just doing the work and getting through it. And I think if you don't, it doesn't just happen, does it? You've got to put the effort in around this stuff. So I would say a massive combination of the two, really.
So after your 18 months and you were thinking, right, I don't want to be here much longer, how did you find this new role? Was that, again, through your recruiter pal, or?
That was again through this recruiter pal. And he lined me up a couple at the time, and a couple of, I think it was 2 or 3 that were knocking about at the time. One was insurance and something else I can't remember, and then this pet food. And it happened to be in Macclesfield, where I was from originally. And I thought, that sounds quite interesting, actually.
Sounds convenient.
Met the 3. There were 2 founders who'd set the business up, both called Roger, who were your classic entrepreneur types. You name it, they'd sold it in the past: secondhand cars, timeshares, anything in between. And they had started the business selling basically out the back of a van. I mean, they were going to cat shows every weekend, selling the stuff, driving back on a Sunday. That was the model. And originally they started with cat litter, a sort of natural made byproduct of corn manufacturing process. But it was a really, really good product, and they were selling that. And then they were building up a few more products, some bedding type stuff, toys and things like that. But then they came across a food idea. So there was an Italian business that was selling premium natural cat food. They looked on the back of the tin, saw it was made in Thailand, and being the types of guys they were, they flew over to Bangkok, arranged some meetings with the factories. One of them remortgaged the house, and they got their first container of Applaws over, which is the main brand name. And then from then on, it was sort of growing sort of reasonably well. But then in 2006, one of their friends, a guy called John, came into the business, and he was the one with the corporate sort of pedigree, marketeer by background, and he really lifted their vision a little bit, really, from not just cat shows or the odd wholesaler, but what about pets at home? What about Sainsbury's, Tesco's? What about international expansion? And he was the one who got them thinking about that side of it. And then in 2008, they hired a guy called Julian Bambridge, who's the current CEO now as a sales director, with the job of expanding it out into the likes of Pets at Home and the UK grocers. And then in July 11, those three founders stepped away from day-to-day running the business and moved Julian up to MD. And then he hired me as his FD at the back end of that year, to sort of take the business from being owner managed to having a bit more professional structure and driving the growth in a much more professional way, really.
And how were you feeling then? Were you feeling like, I've been an FD, so I'm loads more confident now, I know what I'm doing? Or were you thinking, no, I've still got a lot to learn, I don't know about cat food?
Ironically, walked in through the door November 2011, and after a month realised that they had no cash. It's a business that's struggling and has got elements that are going backwards has no cash. A business that's growing really, really quickly has no cash because it's all tied up in stock.
Well, just explain to the average, because the average layperson who's not an accountant might be thinking, well, how can you not know if a business has got cash or not? Surely it's obvious, but it's not in a business, is it?
No, it isn't. So in this business, they didn't have a daily cash flow forecast. It was, at the time, it was growing at 50% a year, but the gross margins were only 30%. So if you think you're selling something and only making 30% on it, but you're growing at 50%, you can't recycle that cash through quick enough to buy more stock.
And also, it depends on who your customers are. You might sell something, but then you don't get paid for 60 days because you've got invoice agreement. That's the payment terms with your big supplier, which will often be the case, isn't it, with the likes of Pets at Home and Sainsbury's and everyone. Yeah. So,
and that's where that business was at the time. And you talk about luck, but I'd done this daily cash flow, and I'd gone to June and said, we've got a bit of a problem here, mate. I think we've got to think about what we're doing here. I think the business had 2 months before I joined, it had breached its banking covenants on the invoice financing it had, which is a way of funding that debtors cycle. So instead of us having to wait 60 days for Pets at Home to pay us, we can get the money off the bank as soon as we've raised the invoice. So it's a way of closing that loop.
Because they know you're good for it, essentially, at that point in time. So it's just
they own the debt, in effect, the debtor, so they can collect that in. So they've got their sort of money side of it covered, and they charge you an interest rate to do that. But it was around December time where we got a call from Coles in Australia, which is a big supermarket chain over there. There's Coles and Woolworths, the two of them. And it was an ex-Pets at Home buyer who said, look, got a great opportunity for you here, need a premium cat food brand. Can you get this in by April? And that was the real cash flow fuel for the business, because we shipped it direct from Thailand, which is where the majority of the product is manufactured. And we could invoice it off to Coles before we had to pay the supplier and get the money back through quickly enough. And it was very, very good gross margins at the time. It was close to 50% rather than 30% at that point, because the Australian dollar was so favourable. It's not less so now. But that then gave us a bit of headroom on the cash to fuel and fund the rest of the growth that was going on across the business. And that was just timing, perfect timing for us.
Oh, it's so interesting, isn't it? How these things come about.
But if we hadn't had that, it would have been very different. And then you had sort of 6-12 months of really good trading record. Then you're building credibility with HSBC, who we were banking with, and then you're on a roll. Then you're sort of in motion then, and you can carry on driving things through. And the key there really was to to drive the gross margin forward as much as possible. So when I sort of landed in that business, daily cash flow was forecasting was one thing that they didn't have. The other thing they didn't have was they couldn't tell what margins they were making by product or by customer. So they were launching in new customers with no idea whether they were profitable or not. And the biggest customer at the time was an Italian distributor, and they were making 3% gross margin on that.
I don't know how a business can get to that size without knowing these kind of things.
I think because they grow so quickly. They grow so quickly. They don't have a chance to pause, and that's where they get into trouble. And you've got to remember the skill sets of the individuals. You know, the talk about Roger. You know, pretty inspirational guys from a entrepreneurialism perspective, but they can't navigate their way around a set of management accounts, and they can't work through what gross margin they need to make on something to make X out of the end of it. So it's about getting this blend of skill sets right at each stage. And we've done the amount people talk about the Alex Ferguson thing at Manchester United about changing the team and creating new teams as he's moved through. That's what we've had to do at MPM over the years, because every time we've gone from 10 million to 30 million to 60 million to 100 million. The people who are right at 10 million aren't necessarily right further down the line. So someone who's brilliant with a Midlands wholesaler is not the person you're going to put in front of Sainsbury's or Tesco's. You need a different individual who looks at it in a different way, is a bit more organised in how they approach.
And how do you make sure you stay relevant at all those levels?
Well, I think that's where that accountancy thing comes in, because you can detach yourself from it and see where you're heading. But my role in the business has morphed hugely over the years.
Because you said at the start you're not really an accountant anymore.
No, and I don't.
What are you now officially?
Well, I'm now called Chief Operating Officer, which is a very grandiose title for basically someone who sorts things out in the business. But that I've touched every bit of MPM, probably other than sales in a direct sense, but from a commercial sense, I've been heavily involved with the sales side and marketing. But it's how we used to divide it up between us was Julian did all the exciting sales and marketing stuff and traveled the world, and I kept the home fires burning in the office around finance, HR, customer service, supply chain. And you just build this sort of knowledge base about how the business functions and how it works. And for us, it's that cycle of a tin around the business as it goes through each team or each area, and having a grasp around, right, we need to build that bit, we need to strengthen that area, and that's how I've done it. But you do look back at times and think the business is so different to how it was when I came in. You do have to almost pinch yourself on occasions.
Well, you can't predict these things, because it's just like we say in the role of luck. You can't plan for that because you can't, by the very nature of it. And I think it's interesting that, because with the accountancy qualification, by the end of your exams, it becomes less about accountancy and it's more a generic business qualification, isn't it? It's about being able to identify the risks, how to scale a business, how to expand, all that kind of thing. And you end up putting the technical stuff that you've learned, but into very real life examples that enable you to sort of ask the right questions and try and see where the blind spots are. So you don't have to be an expert in operations or HR or whatever it is, but you just need to be able to identify that there might be a blind spot there or an issue coming up, and then you can hire in the right expertise that do have that kind of techie detail.
Exactly. And a lot of it's just keeping it as simple as possible.
Which is easier said than done sometimes. And it's a bit like getting the right expertise. That's easier said than done, because you don't, to Roger Squared's point, they were great entrepreneurs, but they probably didn't know that they lacked the commercial nous, or that they even needed, they might not have thought, well, why do we need to know how much margin we're making? As long as we're just growing sales, isn't that okay? And if you don't know that there's a blind spot there, you can't even then attempt to get the right help if you don't know it's an issue.
And that's it's anyone can come up with a solution, but it's keeping that solution as straightforward and repeatable as possible, and having the information in front of you to make those decisions. And that's where I've been very fortunate that I've worked with Julian, who is in the early days, I used to talk a lot about, he's high energy guy. He's a very, very good salesperson. And the joke used to be that he would run through a brick wall to get where we needed to be. And my job was sort of to pick up the bricks and put them in a neat little pile behind him and say, maybe next time, could you just use that door over there? Yeah. But that's, again, that role's changed over time. Julian's a lot more savvy around the numbers and the sort of direction of the business than he would have people believe. And I'm a lot more salesy and sort of aggressive in going after opportunities than the sort of lazy interpretation of our two roles would lead you to believe. And that it's been that combo, because I don't think you can sort of do this sort of stuff on your own. You do need people around you, and it's pulling in those different skill sets. I'm sure there's a podcast out there called The Unlikely Marketeer or something.
Maybe.
But that you do need that other side of it. It's not all just about having a handle on the numbers. Say you need the full rounded picture of this stuff, which I do think is what that accountancy qualification gives you. I've always said to people, I'm not a technical accountant. I'm not going to be able to draft up a set of statutory accounts or do a tax return for someone. But the basic principles, like you said, of how do you take a situation and build the right approach to getting the best outcome, that's what the qualification gives you, I think.
I didn't realise we were going to talk so heavily about the ACA qualification, but now that we have, I feel like I need to get in touch with the ICAEW and see if they want to buy this episode and use it as a recruitment tool.
But it's one of the common themes between us, isn't it? I mean, we've both been through it, and we've both used it in different ways, and I think it shows the breadth of it, really, in terms of what it can give you. But it's not I don't think people need it's not the numbers side of it, is it? I think with this, it's the thinking through the processes. Yeah.
It's definitely the other skills. And I remember when I applied to Deloitte, so you wanted to join because you could do a gap year. I wanted to join because I thought it meant that I'd be able to work in New York, because I just left uni wanting to work in New York, because I just used to watch Friends and Sex and the City and was obsessed with New York. And I thought, how do I work in New York? Maybe if I join a global organization that has an office there, that seems like quite a nice route. And I remember asking Mako, I think it was, who Andrew McKinnon, who's now the CFO of Moonpig, and sort of saying, can you transfer internationally if you work here? And he was just like, yeah, that's definitely a possibility. You have to pass your exams and everything first. But if you become a chartered accountant, you've got job security for life. And I was like, oh, this sounds fantastic. I'm going to get to work in New York and I've got job security for life. Like, what more can I honestly want?
So why did you never do that then?
What, go to New York?
Yeah.
I guess, I left, didn't I, before that became an option because I left not long after I passed my exams, like a lot of people do, thinking, oh, I can't hack this. The hours are too long. But then funnily enough, I then started working at Charles Tyrwhitt, and then I ended up being able to go to New York quite a lot through Charles Tyrwhitt because they had an office there. So I kind of realized my New York dream, but not in the way that I thought I would.
But he did. That's the thing of it. It does open doors, doesn't it? I mean, I never would have thought that pet food would take me to Thailand, Australia, Uruguay, Ecuador, the US, Canada, all these places I've been to.
Pet food's so glamorous. Who knew?
Rock and roll.
Well, it's done you all right.
Yeah, but it's been an exciting sort of journey, really, and people use that a lot, don't they? Journey.
Yeah, we've all got a journey, and we're all following our own paths.
But it's been an interesting one. I didn't think I'd be, looking after pet food for 10 years.
So what's your key piece of advice if someone is listening to this? Because people used to during season 1, people would message me and ask for like careers advice. I guess what would be your top piece of advice? I guess taking a risk, but being open.
I've always got 2 when people ask me. So one is do take that gamble. What's the worst that happens? I mean, the worst that could have happened to me was I would have just rung up and said, could I come back to Deloitte, please? Well,
the worst that would have happened is the business didn't have any cash and continued to have no cash and went tits up under your watch.
Yeah, but then I would have ended up back at Deloitte. I would have been fine.
So was that your backup plan?
Yeah, I would have just gone back. We just rung them up and said, sorry, it's not worked out. Please have me back. And then I would have gone again. And I know I'm always very aware of a colleague that you know as well that worked in a business that went bust. And I think that did scar him as an individual. And he had an opportunity to go back into another business that was connected to the one that had gone bust. And he should have done it, but he didn't. And I always look at that as you should have done it. You should have gone for it again.
But it's not being scared, is it? I think that's the thing, because we're being flippant about this. Like, I would have just gone back to Deloitte, but not a lot of people would have wanted to have done that, because you wouldn't have wanted to go back and think, oh yeah, I tried and I failed. I guess you obviously don't care about that, but I think a lot of people would. A lot of people would worry about losing face.
But I think you fail every day, don't you, at something? You don't sail through life everything just going perfectly your way. And I think I would always say back yourself and take that. Don't take this a stupid gamble. I mean, it's, you've got to make sure the odds are vaguely in your favor, but if you get the chance to do something and you believe it, then I think with a positive attitude you can achieve a lot. And then the second bit for me is always have a plan. Have whether it's 5 years, 10 years. I've always had a 5-year plan about where I want to be 5 years down the line, and it might be across from a work perspective, or it might be from a personal perspective. But I always go back to I don't even know if it's true or not, but there was something in like a load of Harvard undergraduates where they got them to write down in a lecture where they'd be in 5 years' time or something.
Oh yeah.
And then they went back to them, and the ones who'd actually written it down and kept that piece of paper were more likely to have achieved what they'd written down.
There is something, when you write it down, your brain registers that it's important and you're more likely to achieve it. That is true. I believe that.
And just checking in against it every so often, and you might adapt it and you might tweak it. But that's been a really useful tool for me to sort of make sure that I'm on track career-wise with where I want to be and where I want to be heading.
That's so interesting. I wouldn't have had you down as someone that manifests.
Man of mystery.
You are man of mystery from Macclesfield. Well, that was a lovely, uplifting chat, and I think I'm definitely going to go and write down my 5-year plan once I terminate this call. It's not written down already. Sort of written down.
And you've just taken your own risk anyway, haven't you?
Well, I have. Yeah, I'm listening to you. I mean, yeah, I'm listening to you thinking, oh, I've done something similar, although I checked the bank balance and we do have some cash, so that's a good start at least. But now that I'm at the helm, hopefully it won't run out so quickly.
Yeah, famous last words. No, I think I think now more than ever, people are being braver around their decisions, and I think it's absolutely the right approach to take to this stuff. Because you've only got one shot.
Be positive.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Right, well, we'll leave it there then.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you for chatting to me.
Thanks so much for listening. And if you enjoyed that episode, please make sure you hit subscribe. That seems to be what all the other podcasters ask people to do. And also, please do give me a follow on Instagram. I'm on @theunlikelyaccountant. So you can send me any DMs with any thoughts or feedback. Only if it's complimentary, of course.